broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, good afternoon. Today is Tuesday, March 26th. The Developmental Disabilities Administration welcomes you to the DDA Educational Series. Today's topic is Person-Centered Planning Tools and Strategies. Before we begin, I'd like to go over a few things about the webinar. This webinar is open to all stakeholders and will be recorded and put on the DDA website. All participants will be in listen-only mode. There are two options for listening to the webinar, by computer and by phone. And if you have trouble hearing, you may try switching modes by clicking on the appropriate button on the webinar panel. There are handouts for the webinar today, and you can find them in the handouts section to the panel to your left. They can be emailed to you if you email me, Donna Will, at donna.will@maryland.gov. We will be recording today's webinar, and we will send the link in the follow-up email that will go out later to all who register. Questions can be typed in the question box, which is located in the panel to your right. They will be read and answered out loud. So I guess now we can begin the webinar. I'd like to introduce Patricia Sestoki, DDA's Director of Programs. Good afternoon.
Hi, Donna. How are you?
Hi.
Great. Thank you guys for joining us. With me, I have the Director of Federal Programs, Rhonda Workman, who will be joining me in today's webinar. I'm going to go to the next slide. Oh, here we go. So today we're going to do an overview, which we always will start our webinars with the overview of DDA. We're going to talk about person-centered planning tools that Maryland is going to be using, and then DDA's person-centered planning format for specific for Maryland DDA. And then we're going to talk about some roles and responsibilities and some timelines, and then we're going to open it for questions and answers. So our overview, as you know, we at DDA believe that all people have the right to live, love, work, learn, play, to pursue their aspiration in the community. So we really believe that people should be engaged in the community and make sure they have a really good, fulfilling life based on resources from families and individuals. We provide a coordinated service delivery system to enable children and adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities and families to work towards self-determination, interdependence, productivity, integration, and inclusion in all facets of community life across the lifespan. We believe in this very solely. Everything that we do at DDA, from our services, through our service definitions, through our business practices, we really want to empower people and make sure that there is an integration and inclusion of all facets of the services and the communities. And we also want to make sure that we educate the community at large and our stakeholders and families and individuals, so that the more that you know, that the better you're able to make informed choices about your services and supports. We are one of many resources and services and supports available to assist individuals and families as they build their life towards a vision for a good life. And that is a path that each person takes on their own based on what works for them, what doesn't work for them. And our goal is to make sure that they have good quality of life and how people define their own good life and what does that really mean. So we serve children, adults, and families. And we keep saying this because we really want to emphasize that we do serve children from birth to death. So, and we also support families, and we support families through our Family Supports Waiver. And there's some specific service that provides services to families. So we really want everybody to know a little more about DDA outside of the usual and customary things people hear about us. We want you to know children and families are a priority for us, as well as adults with developmental disabilities. So what is the guiding force behind person-centered planning? Why is it that we're talking about person-centered planning today? Well, we're talking about person-centered planning today because Maryland has, for the last 3 years, been working with stakeholder groups, family, and people in services to create a format of how do we ensure that we're talking about what's important to that person. And so this is some guiding principles that we think. We want to make sure that we understand, we define a good life as unique to that person that is being supported. It is not mine or Rhonda's good life, but it's that person. And what does that look like? And all supports and services, not just DDA funded services, need to be considered and explored to reflect the plan. So we want to know what resources in the community that the person uses are available to them through church, neighbors, other state funds, What does that look like? Some people call it natural support. Some people say, why do you use that word? What does that really mean? But it's really what other services and supports that you use in the community that enhances your quality of life and a good life. And to focus should be created. I plan to support the good life versus a service life. So we really want to talk about, we don't want to talk about what are all the services that people can get, but what is an enhanced supports, and how do you build that supports around that person, whether if you're using your neighbor, your church, a waiver, if you're using other state services, and how do you create that whole comprehensive support services for that person. So that's a guiding force for the services that we're trying to deliver. Person-centered planning is a continual process. It is an ongoing process where we listen, we learn, and we explore about the person and what is relevant and meaningful to that person, so that we can really create a good vision and a plan within that year for that person, according to the person's life circumstances. In a person-centered system, the person and people that supports them have critical roles and responsibilities in the person-centered planning process. I may have a circle of supports, and in that team, somebody may help me with my bank management. I may have somebody that can help me with my morning routine. Maybe somebody that can help me with my job, or maybe somebody's making some decisions on my behalf. So everybody in the team plays a critical role, and who decides who that team is that person or that guardian who supports that individual. Also, supports and needs may change across the lifespan. Pursuing and enjoyment of what is important to the person remains the guiding force and principle. So we always say what works best for the person, what engages the person, what is the assessed need for that person. So it's very focused on that person. And there are several person-centered planning tools and approaches that can be used to plan with the person and not for the person. So the person is driving the system, the boss. They're actually leading the discussion. And if the person is not able to articulate through communication of how they're leading the discussion, then how do we make sure that the people that knows that person best are engaged and a part of that person's team, so that we, through their eyes and through their vision, can help us articulate what are those areas. So we're going to talk a little bit about the foundation and planning tools. And so with that, the DDA has been using the integrated STAR, and we partner up with the community, the communities of practice, the live course. And with that, we're looking at, we built our person-centered planning on non-domains. So when a coordinator community services meets with you or the family or all the stakeholders get together, we're looking at some domains that is supposed to help explore and discuss different areas. And doesn't mean that you have to address all of that in 1 year, but people can prioritize, the person can prioritize what they want to focus on within that year. We have employment. Employment is one of the categories that is something that the CCSs need to be discussing, that we want you to discuss. We're in employment for state. So we have that as the first item in our person-centered plan. And that's for you to be able to talk about, hey, do you like where you're working? Do you want to get more money? Do you need some supports? If so, what kind of supports? Are there any barriers to employment? If there are barriers, what are those barriers and how we can address them throughout that year? And then day-to-day life, community involvement, communication, finance, health and wellness, home and housing, lifelong learning and relationships. And through this webinar, we're going to go in detail a little bit of how we use those domains and what does that mean. And hopefully every time you see those icons to the right of the screen, you can relate, for example, that home and housing has a little housing icon, or the day-to-day has a little clock. So we're trying to also brand what we're trying to do in Maryland, so that every time you see that, you relate that icon to that specific supports and service or that exploratory area. So part of what I want you to look at in this slide is the person-centered planning tools. We're going to talk about what those tools are. There's a lot of them in the United States. We're going to talk a little bit about the focus area and exploration, which is I just went over very briefly of the 9 areas that we have. And then we're going to talk about the person-centered plan and the roles and responsibilities and some critical time frames that people need to know to ensure that you get your planning time to the CCS and to the DDA. So I'm going to talk a bit about the planning tools. There are several national planning tools that have been developed and are used across the nation. The DDA does not mandate specific planning tool, so you can use anything that you want to do, as long as you're able to then articulate to us what's important to that person and prioritize what that person wants to work on that year and what is their trajectory to their good life, how they define the good life. The DDA offers training for all stakeholders on various person-centered planning tools, and this is the link of a memo that we put out last year about the person-centered planning, the thinking, the philosophy, roles and responsibilities, and a really robust slides, information about how does the process work. What we're trying to do at DDA is provide training in sections. So we provided training on person-centered planning to the case managers. Now we're going to be providing training to the providers and families and the person. And so we're partnering up with the DD Council, who's going to help us to do some training for families and individuals. We also understand and know that there's a huge need to work with providers and understanding the new practices the DDA will be engaging on person-centered planning and what is the role of the provider when they're developing their implementation plan. So we have a lot to do. Today's webinar is just giving you an overview of some expectations so that we're hoping that we're educating, and as you type in your questions and make recommendations, we'd be happy to consider them. Individuals facilitating specific planning strategies should be trained in specific planning tools. Some of the tools require specific training, a specific credentialing, specific certification or mentoring. And so we want you to kind of be very aware that before you start using all the tools, you have the proper training. I'm going to turn this over to our Director of Federal Programs, who's going to go into more detail about one of our planning tools that we really are very proud of and we really want folks to engage in, that we have adopted here in Maryland, and that is our integrated STAR. Rhonda?
Thank you, Patricia. So we're going to go through a few planning tool examples, and as Patricia said, it's really important to make sure that you receive appropriate training and certification based on the different tools we'll talk about. But the first one relates to that integrated STAR, and as you see here on the screen with the integrated STAR, there's different areas that can be explored related to it. And we know that all people need support to lead good lives. I need supports. Patricia needs supports. So it doesn't matter who we are, where we are in our life. There are different supports that can help us as we go through our day-to-day and our future plans. And by using a combination of different kinds of supports, such as technology and community resources and relationships we have, that can help us in terms of our pathway towards that trajectory towards our good life, the trajectory towards being truly inclusive, having a quality and community life versus what we often refer to as a service life. And so this is one of the tools that we have been going around and sharing through our presentations and information in our communities of practice for supporting families that individuals and families can use to help brainstorm and strategize about different areas of supports that they have related to people's personal strengths and assets, relationships, technology, the community resources, and then also to consider eligibility-specific supports. And for eligibility-specific supports, that's the area where you would see Medicaid and disability programs to include the DDA waiver programs. And you can see that that's only one component when you look at the STAR holistically that should be considered, because we want to make sure that the plan is holistic and considers all these opportunities to support people in their vision for a good life. These are a couple of other examples of person-centered planning tools that have been used nationally. The first one is a visual of a path, which stands for Planning Alternative Tomorrows with Hope. There are specific trainings related to PATH and using that person-centered planning methodology, but you can see in the visual here that it's a demonstration from a visual perspective, the path that people are on to get to their hopes and dreams of the good life. The second one is referred to as MAPS, and so it's similar in terms of using a visual aid to help articulate people's trajectory towards a good life, and it's kind of the map that gives a difference and a pathway for people to explore where they want to go. Some additional planning tools that are available is the essential lifestyle planning, personal future planning, and whole life planning. And again, the DDA does not mandate any of these planning tool examples that we're sharing. It's really based on the person and their family and other supports in terms of what planning tools they want to use. But the goal, again, is to start with the trajectory towards a good life, the outcomes, the goals that people are trying to achieve, and using different planning methodologies to identify additional information, services, and supports, and what's important to and important for people. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the DDA's person-centered planning format. And the DDA has been working over the last several years with a variety of stakeholders in a committee to come up with some of the key kind of planning formats in terms of data tools that we need to collect required based on state or federal requirements while also trying to stay true to being a person-centered plan related to the person's outcomes and goals. So here's an example of what we have built within our new information technology system that we often refer to as LTSS. The plan is referred to as My Life, My Plan, and My Choice. The name of the plan was provided to us by recommendations from self-advocates when we met with them. And you can see there's an opportunity to put a picture of the person can choose if they want a picture. It's not required. But this first page is just kind of giving us some basic demographic information, some contact information, and then some details in terms of the summary about what I like and admire about myself, what I'm interested in doing, important people in my life, the best ways to communicate with me, and technology I use. You can see that the way that we phrase this, it is about the person. So I own this plan. It is my plan as the participant. So it should be in first-person language. Patricia mentioned that there are different focus area explorations that can help to guide in terms of where I, as a possible participant in DDA's programs, want to go. And so employment will be one area, as we mentioned, that we will be talking about for all people in terms of what's working for them, what's not, what their future goals are. We do recognize that some people may be of retirement age or have other priorities related to their day-to-day, and that's okay too. We'll collect that information in that area, but we do require that be one area that is discussed during the planning process. As Patricia mentioned, there are a variety of other life domains listed here and noted in our icon that we can explore. We don't have to explore all of them. We can choose certain ones that are important to us today. It may change during the course of the year. We may want to talk about a new one that we didn't discuss prior to our annual plan process, but it provides an opportunity for individuals, families, and teams based on the person's choice to explore these different areas.
Yeah, and we don't expect the family or the person to get together with the case manager and go over each of this. This could be based on person, their priorities, and what they want to discuss and talk about within that plan year.
So this is an example of one of the areas, the communication focus area, in terms of some of the information that would be collected. The first part is what's working for me, right? So my abilities, my strengths, my preferences, my contributions can be noted here. And to gather this information, it's really a personal conversation with individuals and families. This is not taking a form to a meeting or a time with the person to kind of go through and fill it out like it's an assessment. This is really the gathering of information, an ongoing process and dialogue between the coordinator of community services with the individual, their family, and their circle supports. So they'll collect information through those conversations that may occur over a period of time to include what's working for me and what's not working for me. That'll help to identify maybe some possible unmet needs and then some additional supports that may be needed. Those supports, again, could be natural supports, family supports, community supports, and after looking at through the exploration of that, it may be identified that there is a gap and an assessed need that maybe we need to explore waiver services. But we want to highlight things that are important to me as a participant and what are important for me. And then it's also important to identify any risk that may come up related to these conversations. Possibly, maybe I do not communicate using my voice. So a risk may be that if I don't have my technology to be able to express my wishes, choices, feelings, and things that are going on, then I could be at risk of not being misunderstood or even health and safety issues. So this, again, is just one example of general kind of conversation to help focus on an area related to communication. This is an example of the outcome page component related to the person-centered plan that we have. So the outcome, another way of thinking about an outcome is a goal. What am I trying to achieve? Where's my trajectory? For example, maybe I want a job. Maybe I want to live on my own. And so our outcomes have been categorized based on the personal outcome measures from the
CQL.
From the Council on Quality Leadership. Sorry, had to stall there. But you can see there's some general areas. So the first area would be my security. We have my community, my relationships, my choices, and my goals. And within each of those sections, there are some specific personal outcome measures that can be selected. People are safe. People are free from abuse and neglect. People use their environments. People are connected to natural support networks and such. From those different categories, then specific goals and outcome strategies can be listed and then supported by potentially waiver services and a provider implementation plan.
Each service has to be tied to a goal.
And each service has to be tied to a goal. So you'll see here that we are collecting some additional information to make sure that the person is informed and well supported, such as particular technology that may be needed, how often we should be assessing progress towards the outcome, what it would look like to me, what it would look like to my team, the frequency of assessing satisfaction, the frequency of assessing the implementation strategies, because sometimes we have an implementation strategy or a strategy from our provider that we select that may be not achieving the outcomes that we want or the progress that we want, that may need to be revised or edited. And also want to look at the frequency of reviewing that. You can see near the bottom of this that support considerations are also listed because we want to make sure people have a good life and not a service life. So are there other supports, natural relationships, community resources, the library, other groups that we may be involved in that can be part of the support network? Are there other non-DDA agency resources to support outcomes, such as maybe a respite program through the Department of Human Resources, maybe a Medicaid state plan service such as Community First Choice? And then you see at the bottom there's requested DDA services to support the outcome. So in order for us to consider the DDA, any waiver services are authorized, it must be associated with an outcome so that we know that the purpose of those services. And then existing DDA services to support the outcome are also noted at the bottom. This is another vision or another view of the outcome page. And so you can see the specific, there would be an outcome page for each service listed, and it will note the important to and the important for me. Those can be prioritized based on my own priorities, what I think is the first priority versus the second, some projected start dates and completion dates. It'll also note the progress that we talked about. So this is just another view of the page we just shared.
So this view is actually the printout of what the people in services and families will get from the LTS system. The previous slide just gave you an overview, and we kind of uploaded the outcomes so you can see what do we look for outcomes. So the one was instructional, and this is the actual printout of what you'll get from the LTS system.
And this is an example of the individual signature page. So as the coordinator of community services works with the individual and their family and circle support during the course of the year to identify outcomes and life domains that they want to explore, they will develop that person-centered plan based on what the person has chose as their priority and important to, important for. And then there's the signature page. So the individual will get a copy of the plan. It'll include the information about the outcomes, and if a services are identified, they would be noted as they're listed here on this slide here. And also, if a provider selected, they would be noted here. A signature page and a person-centered plan can be submitted to the DDA and approved without a provider listed. The important thing is that we would need to have a service that would be needed. Providers can be identified before or even after the person-centered plan has been submitted and authorized. It would just be updated if the providers are not listed. And the information about the frequency, duration, and the scope of the service would be noted on the signature page. The signature page for the individual, and there's also a signature page if the person has a legal representative, would be shared with the appropriate people for them to review the plan and then sign off on the plan. So it's important before signing this signature page that you review the person-centered plan, the outcomes, what's been selected, and the services to make sure that that meets your choices that you discussed in your person-centered planning strategies and tools. If a provider is listed, the provider will also have a provider signature page that will list only the services that they're providing and the specific frequency, duration, and scope. The provider then would need to review to make sure that they are in agreement with that. The provider does create their own implementation plan that needs to be shared with the individual and the family so that they're aware of that and the individual and family is in agreement with that. But the signature pages are required prior to DDA approving or authorizing the person-centered plan. So just to summarize again, what we've been talking about is the person-centered planning tools. Again, there's a variety of them, from the integrated STAR to essential lifestyle planning, PAPs and MAPs and others that can be used. That's a conversation and a relationship building with the CCS and the person, the representatives and their circle support. And then there's the opportunity to explore a variety of different focus areas. That then links and goes into what the person-centered plan would be in terms of development of that and submission to the DDA. But it doesn't end there, because person-centered planning is an ongoing process, and the plan can be revised based on person's needs, choices, changes in goals, and focus area exploration, which then creates this continuous process of person-centered planning. So now we want to talk a little bit about roles and responsibilities. And Patricia mentioned earlier that the DDA issued a memo related to specific roles and responsibilities, starting with the participant, the coordinator of community services, service providers, and also the DDA. This is some of the information that was included in that memo that we wanted to share with you today. So the person supported, these are our participants that we are supporting and our service delivery system is based on. They determine who participates in that person-centered plan development. They can have a large team or a small team, but it's based on their choices. They develop, with the support of their coordinator community services, their person-centered plan summary and outcomes and needed services and supports. And again, as we mentioned, that includes a variety of things, because we want to have a good life and an inclusive life. So it could be natural supports, community and other contributing resources to support the person. It could include my own personal income from my jobs, so I can take the vacations I want or buy things I want to get. And it also can identify potential DDA services based on that assessed need. But the person is in the driving seat. They're the one who's going to make those choices. They also develop, with the support from a provider agency that they choose, the goals and implementation strategies necessary to support their identified outcomes. And they also inform the team members if any changes are needed. And again, they can make those changes during the course of the year. They do not have to wait to their annual team process. In terms of families and other important people for the person, authorized representatives, legal guardians, and such, they can help by assisting the person as requested by the team to fully engage in planning through supporting a maximum understanding of options and processes. We want to make sure that the people we support are informed so that they can make an informed decision about their lives and what they want to do. They support the person as they choose to explore new community and employment options and opportunities. Sometimes we tend to stay in our own areas of where we're comfortable with, and so it helps to have friends and a team to help support us to be informed and be made aware of new opportunities to explore that we may have never considered. They also provide essential information that may be important in developing that holistic plan for the person. Our coordinators of community services are available for all people that are receiving services through our ongoing funding, and they conduct ongoing exploration and discovery based on what the person has chosen in those life domains that we shared. They help to facilitate that person-centered plan and identify the outcomes based on what's important to the person and for the person. Again, we're always going towards that trajectory towards a good life. They ensure those outcomes based on those Council of Quality Leadership personal outcome measures that we shared are included in the description, and they also further explain what the person wants. This description can be general and does not have to be necessarily a goal statement. But again, their job is to hear the voice of the person and their informed decisions and to carry that forward. They also help with articulating outcomes to the team members. So they help to be an extended voice on behalf of the person so that everybody understands the person's choices. They're required to enter all this planning and service information into our IT system known as Long-Term Services and Support Maryland. We require that to be entered timely so that we can review that and approve that so that services can begin. And we'll talk about some of the timing. They need to ensure that they're sharing the identified summary and outcome and service sections with each provider that has been selected by the participant or the representative prior to that annual meeting. We suggest a minimum of 10 days, but we know that occurs even earlier than that. And this helps to support the provider and give them time for determination of proposed services related to the frequency, duration, and scope that they recommend to support the person in terms of the outcome that they're trying to achieve. Providers can also then begin to develop some goals and implementation strategies with the person supported that can be shared before the meeting and ongoing. The coordinator also gathers signatures from the person, their authorized representative, and all service providers on the PCP. Again, this is required in order for the DDA to authorize that plan. They will notify the person and the providers of the approval or denial within 5 business days of the DDA completing the review. And they're responsible for monitoring the person's satisfaction with services and progress towards outcome. And that's based on a scheduled basis of at least quarterly and sometimes more frequently, depending on the service delivery. So again, there's the opportunity to make adjustments during the course of the year. If services are not meeting people's goals and outcomes, if implementation plans need to be adjusted, that can occur at any time. The coordinator will be documenting any new exploration and discovery throughout the year and also through their monitoring activities. And they need to facilitate timely revision to the person-centered plan as requested by the person or indicated by change in needs or circumstances. So the service providers also have key roles and responsibilities. They need to ensure that the coordinator of community services has access to the appropriate agency staff for proper discussions about the person-centered plan summary, the person's outcomes they want to achieve, the proposed services, the frequency, duration, and scope, and the implementation strategy. The provider, upon agreement to provide the services to meet those outcomes, will be needs to identify and share with the coordinator for entry into the LTSS system as soon as possible so that we can have that information recorded prior to the annual plan meeting if possible. But again, as we mentioned before, a provider does not have to be identified in order for the plan to be submitted and approved. The provider will work with the person to develop the related goals and implementation strategies, and the provider ensures that their implementation plan will meet the regulatory standards for measurable, observable goals and implementation strategies. The provider will share their implementation plan and updates with the CCS along with their signature page so that they can move that plan forward. and they need to ensure that the implementation goals and strategies on the plan effective date with approval from the DDA regional office. The provider can adjust some goals and implementation strategies as necessary to better achieve outcomes. It's important before they do those adjustments that they talk to the person and the person's team to make sure that they're informed and in agreement of that. And they work in collaboration with all team members to ensure that the process timelines are adhered to for timely completion and submission of the plan elements into the LTSS system with no less than 20 business days before the annual team process. Whenever possible, they need to share determination of service details with the coordinator in advance, generate documentations for service authorization to make sure it's properly vetted, and make sure that the appropriate provider staff are signing off on that well in advance if they've been identified, so that again we can meet those timelines and start services as soon as possible. They should share information with the coordinator for further exploration and any needed revisions to the plan that they may identify by working with the individual directly. The DDA regional offices will fully review all elements of each person-centered plan. That'll include all supporting documentation for an assessed need and any other additional assessments or documents provided by the team or the coordinator. This will be done within 20 days of receipt of the plan to determine authorization prior to that annual plan date to support, again, the continued timely implementations of services. So now a little bit of information about timelines. So also in the memo that we shared, we outlined some timelines that are important to keep in mind. But first we want to share that the person-centered planning is a continual process of listening and learning. There's a variety of exploration and discovery life domains that can be looked at in terms of creating a meaningful life and a trajectory towards what's the good life. So it's not just a one-time occurrence, it's that ongoing conversation and relationship building with the person and their team. And we know that changes may be requested and revisions may be made throughout the year, and the annual meeting date may change, but the actual PCP effective date or the annual date will remain the same for each year. And the person gets to choose that date. But the meeting dates, the pre-planning dates, those can change throughout the year. The suggested timelines are really important to make sure that the services are delivered to the person in a timely manner to support the outcomes and to also ensure that providers are paid in a timely manner. So with the initial plan and then ongoing plans moving forward, we want to make sure we're adhering to these timeframes. So here's some timeframes that we've set in place. 90 business days before the annual plan date, that's the effective date that never changes. After confirming with the person and the representative, that coordinator will connect to finalize the date for the annual meeting. This is based on the person's preferences and a time and location that meets their needs. The person decides when that meeting will be held, and it's important to make sure that there's sufficient time for emergency schedule changes. It could also be weather-related changes that may occur on the date that was originally planned. So that there's enough time to complete all the tasks that are needed and upload of the plan in LTSS so that it can be reviewed and authorized by DDA within that 20-day business for submission. The meeting should be scheduled to take place at least 40 to 60 days prior to that annual date. At least 10 days before the annual meeting, the coordinator discusses the summary, the outcome, and potential services with the person supported to make sure it is what they want, that they're informed and that it reflects their choices. The coordinator then shares and discusses those same elements with the proposed services with the providers that the person has chosen to make sure that the providers are aware and on the same page about the person's choices. This will help to start and identify those service frequency, the scope and duration to support the outcome that the person has selected. The provider then should work with the person to, again, develop those individual specific goals and implementation strategies to support that outcome. Within 5 business days of the team meeting, the coordinator should complete updates and distribute revised copies of the plan and signature page to providers. Because sometimes during that annual team meeting, there may be some discussion or new information that is revealed that the person may make some slight adjustments or different choices related to what they want in the implementation plan or maybe the services. So there may be times when the coordinator will need to revise and update that plan, and they need to do that within 5 business days of that meeting. Within 10 business days of receipt of the update from the coordinator, we need the providers to review their portion of the PCP, to sign and send the signature page back to the coordinator. The participant will also have the opportunity to review that information and sign and submit it back. The total time for the team meeting to submission of the plan should be 15 business days. 5 days for the coordinator to update and 10 days for the provider to review signatures and return the documents to the coordinator.
And we added the 10 days for providers because sometimes the people that are at the meetings are not the people that have been approved to sign on behalf of that provider.
And then within 20 business days of receipt of the plan, again, the DDA will review all the information that has been submitted to make a determination. If there is some information that, additional information we need to document the assessed need, the DDA will seek clarification and seek additional information, which could then delay our decision. So the more information that is provided during the plan submission, it will help us to make a timely determination. Within 5 business days of DDA completing our review, the coordinator should notify the person and the provider again of the determination of approval or denial. So now we're going to show a visual related to the flow of services to kind of show you again kind of the next steps in terms of the service delivery. And we shared this at last week's call related to the process of applying to DDA, completing an assessment related to the needs, the DDA eligibility determination, the ability to choose a coordinator of community services, being placed on the waiting list if you've been determined eligible for DDA services. And then the waive placement provides an opportunity to apply to the DDA waivers. There's a waiver packet that we'll talk about in some upcoming webinars and the authorization of that, which in the waiver packet, it includes the person-centered plan. It's required in order for us to demonstrate that there's at least one waiver service that's being requested.
And our goal to try to show this slide is to kind of tell you how we're walking you through DDA system. Last Tuesday we did, okay, how do you then become eligible and what are those priorities? Now is the plan. The next one's going to be about what are the waiver services. And so we're hoping that by the time we finish the series, we can give you a good overview of DDA, and then we're going to do a specialty session so that you can join us.
So this is our contact information that's available in the presentation. As we mentioned last week, we want to encourage you to reach out to the regional offices related to individual specific needs, questions, and they can provide assistance related to that.
Okay, I think we're going to open it for questions and answers, and I'm going to read from what we have in our questions chart. So my daughter just started using the Integrated Support Start, and it is a great big picture tool. We have loved it. Thanks. Thank you for that wonderful comment. I thought I'd start with that one. So what is an individual's vision of a good life doesn't include employment? Is it necessary to keep pushing for this as a goal?
So that's a great question. And again, as an employment first state, we encourage people to pursue competitive integrated employment based on their trajectory and own goal. But we do support people through the life course, right, as Patricia mentioned, even to the end stages of life. So we do have people in their 70s and 80s that may have decided that they're done with working and may want to retire. So we do support choices and encourage people to explore competitive integrated employment.
Which brings us to the next question. Will retirement age be determined by the person, the team, or Social Security?
So that's another great question, and I know Stacy Jones, our Director of Employment Services, has a variety of different guidance documents that we'll continue to be sharing. But people of working age, we have an expectation that they would be considering employment, but always we will be looking at the choice of the individual and them having a meaningful day with a variety of opportunities for community.
In the actual PCP document, what is the difference between the effective date and a creative date?
So the creative date is the date that maybe the plan was created. So when it was entered into LTSS, it may be created today when I entered it, but the effective date is the annual plan date, which may not start until May 1st.
Are specific ratios from the provider required in the scope?
So we are looking at specific information related to if there's intense dedicated support such as 101 or 201 to be included in the scope.
Does each service need to have its own separate outcome, or can an outcome support more than one service need?
It's a great question. An outcome can be supported by more than one service need.
What is an authorized representative as opposed to a guardian? Is this a legal relationship?
So that's a great question, and the terms kind of get used interchangeably. But in general, an authorized representative would be someone that I designated on my behalf to represent me. There are legal definitions related to that in the state regulations and statute.
In order to meet the timeline for the PCP process, will DDA consider allowing the CCS access to the record before 60 days prior to the team meeting in order for everyone to meet the requirements without going over the time frame? It seems better for the CCS to be able to start 90 days prior to them rather than 60 days.
So that's a great question, and a couple things to keep in mind. The coordinators of community services are doing at least quarterly monitoring, and as we mentioned in our presentation, person-centered planning is an ongoing process throughout the year. It's not just begin 60 days beforehand. We really want coordinators to be able to build and have a personal relationship with the individual in the team so that they know them and are aware of their goals and trajectories. We recognize that relationship building takes some time, and it's important to find out what's important to the person today, what's their goals for this year, and then to build on that in the future. So again, it's not our expectation that you start this dialogue and exploring things only 60 days beforehand. It should be during the course of the year.
For an agency, what paperwork is required for a PCP? Used to have all the components such as social, history, abilities, assessment. Are they still required?
So with the person-centered planning process that we're talking about today, the provider would be working with the individual in the team if they're selected to identify specific goals and implementation strategies to achieve their outcome. And so that would be, you would be indicating your agreement to provide the services based on your signature on the provider page. The coordinator of community services would then be gathering any additional information related to documentation, social history, and such that may be requested.
Is the CCS or the provider required to give the person, family, guardian a copy of the final plan? I usually have not been given a final copy.
So that's a great question. Absolutely. The coordinator of community services should be providing the final plan to the individual, their authorized representatives, and any provider that's been identified in the plan.
Do you see the PCP model as useful for transition specialists working with high school students and families? And if so, what areas should they focus on?
That's a great question. So transition specialists that may be supporting people coming out of the school system, we encourage you to partner with the coordinator of community services in doing some exploration related to supporting the person, their goals and trajectory towards the good life. You can use our person-centered planning information. We do have a guide for our coordinators of community services related to the person-centered plan that's available on our website. But as we mentioned in this webinar, there are a variety of different planning tools that can be used.
What would cause DDA to deny a person's plan?
That's a great question. And we will be in an upcoming webinar talk about the authorization process and information we need. But a plan that didn't have an outcome associated with the service would be something that would be considered for being denied. A plan that didn't support a person's health and safety would be reviewed and considered for denial. A plan that included a provider that didn't meet the requirements of the community settings rule, if they're in one of our new waivers, would be something that would need to be looked at and denied. So there are a variety of reasons that we'll be talking about in an upcoming webinar.
Where does the person-centered plan desires enter the conversation during the initial application process? Do we include it in the initial application?
So again, the person-centered planning process is a discussion. So I, as a potential waiver participant, I will be sharing what's important to me and important for me, what I admire about myself, my preferences, my interests, whether I like to get up early in the morning or I like to stay up late at night. All that needs to be captured during the discussion in the planning process, and also in discussion of the development of the provider implementation strategy to make sure it's going to meet my needs and my choices.
Well, I know this is what we are doing. Many CCSs are not getting the interview done prior to the meeting, which is what we were told would happen. Is this true?
So we are working to support a variety of providers, coordinators of community services, the whole system related to moving the process forward. There has been some challenges and some concerns with providers signing off, coordinators being able to get the information in timely, and so we're providing additional technical assistance and information such as these webinars to support the process in meeting the timely completion.
Is there a maximum amount of time that DDA has to review a plan?
As we mentioned, our time frame is 20 days. Again, if we don't have all the information, it may take longer as we seek to clarify that. We're looking to make sure that we meet that time frame and provide additional supports when needed.
Is the PCP process the same for traditional services and self-direction?
Yes, that's a great question. So yes, the process is the same. You want to start with person-centered planning tools. You can look at different life domains to explore. Related to that, identify your outcome and your trajectory, explore different type of supports, and then identify any unmet needs for which then a potential waiver service may be able to assist.
At what age should we start this process?
Oh, that's another great question. So I think of two things when you ask that question. You should always, at any age, start to think about the trajectory towards the good life. What do you want to achieve? What do you want to be? Where do you want to go? What kind of jobs do you want to have? Where do you want to live? And so that should be an ongoing process. Participants or individuals that are have the opportunity to apply to the DDA waiver programs or that are in the waiver program, the person-centered planning process occurs at least annually, and more frequently if there needs to be a revision based on the person's choices and circumstances.
What is your definition of a service life?
Oh, that's a great question. So a service life would look something like this. Maybe I go to a day program during the day. I get picked up by the provider's transportation van. I go to the day program. I'm there all day. I do not engage in any community activities. I don't go out in the community at all. And then I go home at night and go to maybe a group home where I remain in the group home and don't have community interaction. So a service life would be completely supported with services and not interacting or engaged in the community. Again, we want people to have inclusive lives in the community, and so it's important that we look at holistically at all types of supports, and using the integrated STAR as an example, we can look at community resources and not just eligibility specific supports.
Why is there no mention of self-direction in this presentation?
That's a great question. And so as we mentioned before, person-centered planning, regardless of service delivery model, is the strategy and the process that's to be used. So regardless if you're using traditional or self-directed, you want to start with a variety of planning tools and identify the outcome and the trajectory towards the good life.
So what happens if a CCS worker has changed and there is a break in PCP process? Do timelines restart, or do they stay the same in terms of getting the PCP loaded into LTSS?
So that's another good question, and it's important for all of us as a community to try to support to maintain those timeframes, particularly related to the annual plan effective date, because we want to make sure, particularly for people in services, year after year, we want those services to continue, not have a break in services, and not jeopardize the providers by not having it authorized in order for them to bill and be paid.
So for individuals with significant disabilities that limit their ability to communicate and advocate for themselves, how does DDA ensure they are person-centered?
So that's a great question, and people use a variety of different ways to communicate their choices and share their informed consent. Some of us use augmented communication devices. Some of us use gestures or blinks with our eyes. Some of us have representatives that know us well and able to share that.
For current PCPs that will expire soon, for example, in May 2019, how does the process work regarding the timelines?
So PCPs that are annual PCPs that the effective date is in May, the coordinator of community services should be working with the individual and the team in terms of preparing the annual plan. As we mentioned in the slides that you can refer back to in terms of the process, 90 days before, 40 to 60 days before, they should be doing the planning and sharing of information. So you would go through that process related to it, so to support a timely submission and approval of the plan.
I soon will be working with the Maryland Promise program and working closely with DDA and their services. Is this the only for DDA workers?
So we are happy that you'll be working with the service delivery system with the Maryland Promise program. Again, holistically, the plan should look at all services and supports. So we would, if the Promise program is part of support for a waiver participant, that would be listed and included on the list of supports.
Can a representative payee be a staff for the participant?
So that's a great question, and we've shared this in different forms and responses, that in our waiver programs, we specifically list the types of individuals that can provide supports, such as a legally responsible individual and a relative. So it's important to go to the waiver applications in Appendix C and look up the specific service that may be being explored to identify who they would be. But yes, that is an option.
Is the annual plan date the same as the annual implementation date?
The annual plan date is the same as the effective date. The annual plan meeting date can be different.
The CCSs have expressed that they are unable to start the PCP process through LTSS until 60 days out. Is that not accurate?
That, I believe, is accurate, that in terms of opening the new annual plan, in terms of completing the information in there, is it begins 60 days out. But the planning process, the relationship building, the discovery, the discussions of life domains can happen throughout the course of the year.
My family member seems to be assigned a new CCS several times per year. What is DDA doing to reduce this turnover?
So that's a great question. We're providing a variety of support and assistance and training and guidance for the coordinators of community services to support them related to their staffing.
So I got one that says that the person got off the call and then came back on and they missed the answer to the question. We did answer it already, and we are posting this on our website. So please join it so that you can hear the answer to your question. Appreciate it. What does it mean? We have exactly a minute left, so I'm going to read two more questions. What does it mean to receive a determination letter from DDA stating that you have received state supports only services? And we discussed this last time at the last webinar. So I'm going to refer you to look at the webinar that we did last Tuesday, because it defines what supports only is and what does it really mean. But you say you would go through the same process in developing a PCP with our coordinator, and the answer would be no, because people who are supports only are really not getting DDA services at this time.
And if you have any letters, eligibility letters, please call the regional office and they can help to provide additional information related to it.
Okay, it is now 1 o'clock. There's still some questions on the queue. There's about 3, but they really have not a lot to do with the PCP presentation. Let me just see if there's anyone that is critical that you mentioned. Does DDA have a website that families can go to find agencies that give supports through DDA for additional service other than rehabilitations? Yes, we do. It's not specific for families, but in our website, we do have a list of all the providers that offer services for all of our 3 waivers. I'm happy to send you the link to this, and we'll add it to the PowerPoint presentation. All right, everyone, thank you for joining us today. We had a little bit over 296 people join us, so thank you and hope this is very helpful to you. Have a great day.